Thank you. While we were just chatting then, I discovered he's related to the great Bronowski who developed The Ascent of Man, a very famous British Bronowski, which is yet another arrow in his quiver, I see. Well, it's good to be here. The ABC, where I come from, has about 30 of us on staff nationally who work with religion and ethics. That's what we do. It's a secular organisation run by tax. We don't take any position on religions. We do pretty much what our guest does, which is we try to understand them. We try to reflect back to Australia how it is and how it's changing. That's what we do. And so my job today merely is to introduce our guest, Professor Sophia Pandya. She specialises in women, religion and globalisation. They're all important topics for us. She took a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, in Near Eastern Studies and Arabic, and a Master's and Ph.D. from the University of Santa Barbara in Religious Studies. Now that's important to me because studies is the area in which we sort of put aside our own personal belief to try to understand what people do, what the phenomenon of religion and experience is within the world. We do similar things, just much more academically and carefully than I would be able to. Dr. Pandya worked as a part-time lecturer at California State University, Long Beach during 2005 to 2006, and she was hired as a full-time assistant professor in 2006. She spent the summer of 2006 in Sana'a in Yemen, and she's currently working on a project which examines religious change among educated Yemeni women and the implications of modernity, globalisation and education. Today she'll be presenting a talk on the topic of women of faith, challenges and opportunities. I give you a very engaging person, please, Professor.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors here, the Affinity Intercultural Institute, right? Institute? And especially Mr. Ahmed Polat, thank you so much for your hospitality. And I'm very excited to be here in Australia. This is my first trip here, and it's so far very wonderful. I'd like to talk about a difficult subject today. It's difficult because love is blind, right? Love is blind, and we love our religious traditions. And sometimes we're blind to the ways in which some of our co-religionists have justified hurting people, and in this case women, in the name of religion. But I'm going to look at challenges and opportunities because it's true that our world traditions have in some cases hurt women, but the solution to that is also found within the world traditions. So let's go ahead. Let's talk theory first. Sabah Mahmood in 2004 wrote a really interesting book, and to write this book she went and sat in madrasas in Egypt where she interviewed women of faith, Muslim women of faith, and she actually had been quite a feminist Pakistani woman, and she didn't understand why the Muslim women felt empowered, and so she was bringing her own baggage with her when she first began to study them. And she had to learn to put that aside. She had to learn that the very term liberation is quite relative. And so once she did that, she wrote her book, and she began to approach the subject on the woman's terms and was able to describe how they felt empowered by their own activities within Islam. And so Beverly Metcalf also writes about Muslim women, and she says that when you're working with the woman, you have to allow them to define feminism on their own terms. Similarly, you have Chandra Tolpade Mohanty. She points out that Western women feminists have discursively colonized women in the developing world by describing them flatly, by reducing them, by describing them as powerless, as uneducated, as oppressed, illiterate, overly sexualized, devoid of self-determination. And so she writes, and this is a quote, "This results in an assumption of women as an already constituted group, as one that has been labeled powerless, exploited, sexually harassed." So when we talk about the subject of women in world religions, we really have to examine ourselves first. What baggage do you bring to the topic? There's also the post-colonial dilemmas. So Gayatri Spivak is famous for noting that oftentimes in the West there's a project to save brown women from brown men. And that whole project would be called the white savior complex. And then there's the dilemma. If you are a woman from a faith tradition, and in any part of our world, and you want to seek gender justice from within your faith tradition, oftentimes you're told by those that oppose you that you have become Western, that you're West-toxicated, that you're betraying your own people, that the time is not now, that you should wait, that we have bigger problems than women's problems. We're suffering war, we're suffering economic degradation. It's just, you should wait. You should sacrifice your own gendered interests for the family. But if we turn to we're going to look at Hinduism, Judaism, and also Islam. Of course, I could talk about other traditions as well, but the time is limited. So if we turn to Hinduism now, so you have here a very strong image of a woman goddess named Durga Mata. She's riding on a tiger, she's got many arms, and she's a warrior. Okay, she's a warrior. On the, right here on your right, we have the Rama Sita. We have Rama and Sita, and those are they were a married pair. But the myth, the Rama Sita myth within Hinduism, is complicated. Let's just say, and it has had some implications for Hindu women. The story goes like this: Ram and Sita are in love. And then Sita, who's very beautiful, is kidnapped by the evil ruler Ravana. So Ram has to go about to try to get her back, and he's finally able to bring her back with help of various characters. He brings her back, but Ram's brother says, we don't know if she's still pure. We don't know. She should go through a fire. She should step through a fire, Agni, a fire. And if she comes out unscathed, that means that she's pure. So she agrees to do this, although if you think about it, who says that Ram, who says that Ram also was pure during her absence? But so she agrees to do this, and she comes out unscathed, meaning that she's pure. So you would think that she would be accepted back. She was briefly accepted back, but then there was more agitation, and Ram ended up sending her off into the forest and abandoning her in the earlier version of the story told by Valmiki. And in one version, she's actually then just asks Mother Earth to swallow her up, and then she disappears. So what does that say about gender in Hinduism and about the value of men versus the value of women? Here's another goddess. This is Kali. I'm sure you've seen Kali. She's she's stepping on Shiva, and she's got, she's dripping with blood. She's got men's heads around her necklaces, a necklace of men's heads around her neck, and she's quite fierce. She's a warrior. She's the goddess of fertility, but also the goddess of death. Goddess of regeneration, but that's a quite strong, she's also known as the black goddess, strong woman image, but also an image of the unchanneled danger of the feminine force. Okay, so Hinduism is quite complicated when it comes to women's issues, but challenges for Hindu women, definitely the Ram-Sita myth. I mean, Sita was left abandoned and then swallowed by the earth. She could not prove her purity enough, even though she did manage to step through the fire. In family, there's hierarchy within Hindu families in general. Okay, I'm speaking in generalities. Husband is within Hinduism is the lord of the wife, and so so every family member has dharma or duty to the other family members, but a woman's dharma is really very emphasized, her duty to her husband. Unfortunately, in India, there's a lot of female feticide, and that's when you have an abortion to determine the gender of the baby, well, you have an ultrasound to determine the gender of the baby, and then you abort the female babies. Male babies are sometimes, in some families, more valued than female babies. So in India, as of 2011, you have 918 girls for every 1,000 boys. And in the region of Haryana, it's even worse. You have 837 females to every 1,000 males. And then there's also the issue of dowry deaths. And so dowry deaths are when a woman is, or a wife really is killed so that the husband can get another dowry, because in Hinduism, it's the male that receives the dowry. So those are also unfortunately common. Just in 2012, there was over 18,000. Population Research Institute notes that there's at least 12 million and some sex-selective abortions took place between 2000 and 2014. That's 12 million. That's a lot. And then if we talk about opportunities for Hindu women, of course, within any given religious tradition, there are different ways to look at the texts and different ways to look at the bodies of stories. And so in 2015, I should note that India under Modi launched a new program called the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which means Save a Girl, Educate a Girl. It's a campaign to end female feticide. You also have, those images of the very strong goddesses. In many different world religions, there's a dearth of female divine figures. If you think about it, what's the divine female figure in Protestantism? Not really. There really isn't one. In Catholicism, maybe Mary is semi, but Catholicism, Mary is very human. We could debate it. But in Hinduism, you have very strong female goddesses. And in fact, there's this idea of, there's a concept of Shakti. And that the Shakti principle is that, so Purusha would be the male animating energy, but it cannot animate, the energy of the universe cannot be animated without Shakti. Okay, so Shakti is the feminine principle. So there is no energy without Shakti. So you have to have, they're complementary forces. And within different religious traditions, you often have, extremists, and then you have, moderates, you have mystics, you have different strands within the tapestry of the different traditions. So within Hinduism, you have the Bhakti devotional movements, and since that emphasizes spirit over body, spirit doesn't have a gender. You have the 16th century woman Mirabai, and she talked about her marriage to God, right? Not about her domestic realm, her domestic duty. And of course, you have a large body of Hindu men that have historically been quite feminist within the Hindu tradition. I mean, we can talk about whether Gandhi was a feminist or not, right? There's room to say he was and room to criticize him on that front. And then, of course, the reinterpretation of the texts, including the mythology, including that Ram Sita myth. And recentralizing of non-textual authorities. So here you have, so Sita Sings the Blues is by Nina Paley. She's actually not a Hindu, she was a Western woman, but Sita Sings the Blues is nonetheless a really interesting, very, very funny video. You can find it on YouTube, and it reimagines the Sita myth and deeply criticizes Ram's leaving of Sita, okay? And then here, Sita's Ramayana, that is by a Hindu woman, it's hard to see her name, Samira Arni, and Moina Chitra, it's hard for me to see it too, sorry, I can't see it from here. Chitrakar, I think Chitrakar. And so they write Sita's Ramayana, and in that they tell the myth from Sita's point of view. Okay, it's all from Sita's point of view. Okay, so you have a reimagining of the mythology. We're not going to try to read that. Well, how about the top one? I thought that the end of war had meant freedom for us. I had hoped for love. I had hoped for justice. That was not to be. Instead of love, I found, hard to read me, but instead of justice, I can't read it either. I found accusation and distrust. I found accusation and distrust. I see the bottom line. Where could I go? What could I do? Yes, suspicion. Okay. Where could I go? What could I do? So it's about Sita. It's Sita's voice. You hear the woman's voice, and not just the story told from Ram's point of view that she wasn't pure. She's pointing out, like, this is not fair. This is not fair. I walked through fire, and I was not considered pure. It's just an image, no rape, and another image, women's rights in India. Okay, but let's think about the monotheisms for a moment. In the monotheisms, you have a male god, at least for Christianity, certainly, Judaism. In Islam, God doesn't have a gender, but he's still referred to as he. Okay, in the Arabic, not in the Turkish. The Turks get out of it. It's just right? It's a you get out of it, right? So, but John Raines writes about how violence is, quote, rooted in religion. And he points out that, so his argument is that men wrote the scriptures, they constructed a God that was in control, a God that didn't want to lose control, a God that represents the ideal male, quote unquote, ideal male for society. And so in Islam and Judaism, you have divine as genderless. I think in Judaism, the divine is not quite genderless. And Islam, we could talk about Islam, we could say, there's room to argue that that God is, so God is definitely supposed to be genderless, but when you look at the 99 names of God, some of those names appear to have more feminine characteristics, some of those names appear to have more masculine characteristics. For example, if you look at Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, like the compassionate and the merciful, that those two descriptions of God appear so many times in the Qur'an. The word Rahman and the word Rahim both come from Raham, which means womb. But, unfortunately for women, oftentimes those are not, the wombness of God is often not emphasized in the interpretations of Islam. That's the problem that women have. So if we look at challenges for Jewish women, there's some textual support for violence. In fact, in our world's traditions, you can often look at the texts, and there's words on the page, and you can, if you're looking for reasons to hurt your wife, sometimes you'll find it in those, in our global religious texts. So for Judaism, it's found in Hosea chapter 2, again, dependent on how you interpret it. Orthodox women prefer not to read the Torah. In the past, Jewish women were excluded from touching religious texts, excluded from ritual. And our famous Maimonides said that you could scourge your wife with a rod. Scourge means to hit, or you could hit your wife with the rod. And then there's some stereotypes that hamper Jewish women's ability to receive help when they need it. One stereotype is that Jewish women are very strong, and so that, in a given family, it couldn't possibly have been her fault that, it couldn't have possibly been his fault. He couldn't have hurt her. That the Jewish male would be scholarly and could never have hurt her because she must have been the one who had all the power in the family. Just stereotypes about Jewish women and Jewish men. And then the idea that, the Holocaust occurred, so, this is the biggest thing that happened to the Jewish family, so why would you ever, try to traumatize our family more by accusing the father or the husband of domestic violence? Just be quiet, not now, don't accuse anybody. We've already had a big trauma, that we've been traumatized by the Shoah, the Holocaust. And then also just a lack of training by religious leaders. That's a problem. That's a global problem. I have it here for the Jewish example, but that's really a global problem. A lack of training on the part of Jewish religious leaders. And then the idea, the concept of shalom bayit, which is the concept that that the woman is in charge of making the house a peaceful place. So if the house is not a peaceful place, it's her fault. She didn't make it a peaceful place. Okay, but what about opportunities for Jewish women? Of course, the reinterpretation of the religious text, that's universal. Women have become rabbis. It's acceptable within Judaism to dissent. One of my Jewish friends said to me, you know, you get 10 Jews in a room, you'll have 12 different opinions. So and then there's the liberatory themes within Judaism, including Passover, that you escape from bondage into freedom. So women feminists within Judaism have made much of that theme of escaping, you know, domestic bondage or bondage as, you know, the idea that you have to be submissive to your husband and escaping into freedom. Then we have to remember when we think about traditional women, you know, those that choose to be to lead their lives in a very domestic, traditional way, perhaps Orthodox Jewish women. Sometimes that's a choice. They're choosing that. That's a choice. It's not always something foisted upon them. It's nice to remember Rabbi Meir from the 13th century when we're thinking about opportunities for Jewish women, or we're thinking about positive statements made in the Jewish tradition about Jewish women. So here he says, Rabbi Meir says, a Jew must honor his wife more than he honors himself. If one strikes his wife, one should be punished more severely than for striking another person. I kind of like that, right? Let's turn to Islam now. So here we have an image of she looks kind of like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, but she's wearing her hijab, her headscarf. And it says, I actually do not find my hijab restrictive of my personal freedom and choices, and I identify as a feminist, but thanks for all of your assumptions. A little passive-aggressive there, but I don't fault her. Just kidding. All right, so you know, I know that in Australia you also have some problems with Islamophobia. I think under Trump it might be worse for me, right, in the United States. Pretty sure that it's worse in the United States. According to adherents.com, it's the most unpopular religion in the United States right now. Muslims are less popular than atheists, okay? So in 2010, there was a poll done, and in that poll, it was revealed that that around 43% of Americans feel at least some prejudice against Muslims. And a lot of the times when this prejudice is expressed, it is expressed in gendered terms. People maintain the stereotype that Islam is oppressive for women, that all Muslim women are trapped underneath their headscarves, that we must, you know, rip off the scarf and free them, and that kind of thing. So here's some images that you are all familiar with. I really almost don't need to explain this to you because it's just so pervasive. And so right there you have the image of the child bride, and here of the overly sexualized Muslim women that, you know, once you take off the clothes, she's belly dancing, right? And over here, she's just hidden underneath the burqa. You know, you can't see a thing. And we should save her because she's imprisoned and we have to get her out somehow. You know, and then of course there's the alternative image of the Muslim woman as, you know, she's really hiding guns under there and she's really going to kill somebody because all Muslims are terrorists, right? So there's a lot of challenges for Muslim women right now, in fact, maybe more than for other faith traditions because of the overwhelming negativity in the press surrounding their statuses. So what are they dealing with? They're dealing with that. They're dealing with Western stereotypes of them, but then sometimes they're also dealing with when they go home, you know, they're sick of people telling them that they're oppressed, but then they go home and in fact, they do still have to deal with patriarchy, right? Sometimes, you know, Baba is bossy. Baba, husband, older brother is bossy. So in certain areas in the Middle East, female genital cutting, also known as female circumcision, still occurs. That would be, so not everywhere, right? Not in Turkey, not in Iran, not so much, but not in Turkey at all, I don't think, but definitely very pervasive in Egypt. Last I checked, it was about 90% of women are cut. So stoning. When I teach the Islam class, it's very painful to talk about stoning. Stoning is not mentioned in the Qur'an at all, and yet somehow some rural village leaders think that it's part of Islam, even though it really shouldn't be and it isn't. But I don't want to be blind, right? Love is blind, but I don't want to be blind. So it's in Pakistan, for example, it's about 1,000 a year. And that's when a woman is accused of doing something like adultery, or something like that. And she's put in a hole in the ground and then stoned until she's dead, and then they cover up the hole. Domestic violence. So there's a verse in the Qur'an we will look at in a moment that some interpret to sanctify domestic violence. Child marriage. This is a painful one for me because I've been to certain countries where it's considered to be acceptable, even Islamically. For example, in Yemen, girls are getting married very early, sometimes as early as 12 or 13. There's a minimum age of marriage in Yemen. I believe it's 15, but the government, there's a war in Yemen right now, so that's not being upheld. In fact, there's a lot of economic problems, crises during the wartime, so sometimes people are selling their daughters to make some money. Okay, very young girls are getting married. Again, that's not pervasive. None of these things are pervasive in the so-called Muslim world, but they happen, and we shouldn't be blind to it. Marital rape, and this is the idea that you're not allowed to say no to your husband if he wants to have sex. You have to submit to your husband if he wants to have sex. Again, not pervasive, but some Muslims believe that that's Islamic. Okay, and then what about opportunities? So you have the reinterpretation of texts. So this has, of course, been a large, burgeoning project carried out by many famous Muslim scholars like Amina Wadud, who's an African-American scholar. Fatima Mernissi, she's Egyptian. Leila Ahmed, also Egyptian. So they're reinterpreting the texts, reinterpreting the stories. And then you have Sufism, which is just like the Bhakti devotionalism is more about the spirit within the Hindu tradition. So Sufism within Islam is more about spirit and less about the body. It's more about experience of God and less about following rules. So within the Sufi tradition, that has traditionally been very friendly towards women. And then you have the two very strong figures, women figures in Islam, Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Aisha, the youngest wife of the Prophet Muhammad. And here you just have an image of it's just a funny image because it's so there's a headline. It was a headline of a newspaper article about these Indonesian girls. So it says, Indonesians hijab wearing Muslim metal group challenges stereotypes. Yeah, Muslim women do everything. They're awesome. So here's Tawakkul Karman. If we're talking about positive role models, Tawakkul Karman actually launched the Arab Spring in Yemen. She launched it, which led to the overthrow of President Saleh. For that, she won the Nobel Prize. What she did is she went and stood in front of Sana's university and just began to talk. People, gathered, and she had an audience, and then she began to organize them. She launched the Arab Spring in Yemen. You also have other key role models within the community of Muslim women, like Benazir Bhutto, Prime Minister of Pakistan. 45 times in a row in the United States we've had men. Pakistan has a woman leader before the United States. Believe me, I was upset about this last election. Okay, here's some fun images. Hijab is my choice, not compulsion. We want democracy. And this image here is just to let you sort of contemplate the beauty of this. It's beautiful. Look at the little sequins, does up her eyes. But I want to do one last thing before we conclude, and that's to look at so when we think about reinterpreting texts, let's look at the Qur'an. So this is sort of one of the most hot button verses in the Qur'an. And so this is a translation by the famous scholar Yusuf Ali. I have his Qur'an at home, but it's not my favorite translation anymore, okay? so it's about men and women. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let's read this part. As to those women on whose part ye fear disloyalty and ill conduct, admonish them first. Next, refuse to share their beds. So there's a sequence of things you're supposed to do if you're not getting along with your wife. And last, beat them lightly. Okay, so actually the Arabic doesn't say lightly. Yusuf Ali added lightly. It's udrubhunna is the Arabic. The verb is daraba. Okay, daraba can mean a lot of things in Arabic. I did like 8 years of Arabic. At least 26 different meanings. Some of them are to ring a bell, or to move away from, or even to have sex, like a male camel can daraba the female camel. To wake somebody from an unconscious state, to strike out on a trip. It can mean many things. So then you have Lale Bakhtiar. She's a Persian-American woman. So I think she's the first woman who translated the Qur'an from a feminist perspective. And so here's her translation. And those, not even men or women, just those, like your spouse, not your wife or your husband, and those whose resistance you fear, then admonish them. Like first talk to them. Abandon them in their sleeping places, send one to the sofa. And then go away from them. Go away from them. There are different ways to read these words that we have we've got words on paper. But how are we going to read those words on paper? It's important. This is an important issue. So in conclusion, the roles that faith-based women play depend. You should never be reductive about women from a given faith, because it depends. Are we talking, what time period are we talking about? What region? Which class? What sect? What race? And then we should also remember that to varying degrees, women are complicit in the construction of the societies in which they live. Sometimes women struggling for gender justice want one thing in one place, and women in another place want a different thing. Women don't all want the same things, even within the same faith. Unfortunately, we shouldn't be blind, even though love is blind. Religious societies do often justify hurting women, excluding them from ritual practice, excluding them from inheritance, excluding them from decision-making positions in the name of religion. Let's not be blind to this. However, women are awesome. Women are powerful. And so religious women, globally are fighting back about this, actively analyzing, actively reinterpreting their religious texts to promote various types of gender equity. I'd like to thank you very much.